Gospel of John, chapter 1. It's the prologue of John. I invite you to hear these sacred words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being, in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. Praise God for the hearing of these sacred words.
Thanks be to God. Good morning. Merry Christmas. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, your word for us this morning is too much. God, it's too profound. It's too eternal. Lord, that you, the creator of the universe, would take on flesh to be with us. Lord, help us to wrap our minds and our hearts and our spirits around that this morning. It's in your Son, Jesus' name, that we pray. By the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We have all been experiencing the wonder of Christmas, and it truly is the most wonderful time of the year, right? Even we Christians have been experiencing the wonder of the cultural Christmas of Santa Claus, Rudolph, and Frosty, of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Business Saturday, of wrapping paper, ribbon, and shipping deadlines, of a Charlie Brown Christmas, the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, Christmas Vacation, Elf, and the Elf on the Shelf. And of course, we've been experiencing the wonder of Jesus is the reason for the season Christmas, the how dare you say happy holidays Christmas, Merry Christmas. The wonder of the Christmas that we anticipate with hope and joy and peace and love. The wonder of the Christmas of the Oh Holy Night we shared last evening, Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, the shepherds, the angels, the star, and the wise men, the wonder of singing Silent Night with the light of candles illuminating faces streaked with joy and tears. The common denominator of the cultural Christmas and the Jesus is the reason for the season Christmas is the giftedness of it all. The gifts under the tree, and the gift in the manger. In both the secular and the sacred, we are making wonderful memories for our children and our grandchildren, and we are recalling the wonder of our own childhood. What was your most wonderful Christmas? My most wonderful Christmas was the Christmas of 1968. In 1968, I was where my family always was at Christmas. We were at Mammy and Papa's house outside Princeton, Kentucky in Caldwell County, But before we would literally go over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house on Christmas morning, my brother Gary and I would spend the night a few miles away with our Aunt Margaret and Uncle Jimmy and our cousins, Anthony and Brent. This Christmas Eve of 1968 was like every other Christmas Eve of my childhood, with one exception. One exceptional exception. Not up on the roof, but up through the roof, 238,855 miles above the chimney, Apollo 8 orbited the moon, the first human spaceflight to ever reach the moon. The 3 astronauts aboard Apollo 8 became the first human beings to personally witness and photograph the far side of the moon and an Earth rise. Sitting next to the Christmas tree in Aunt Margaret and Uncle Jimmy's living room was a huge, heavy black and brown box of a console television set. The screen flickered black and white, and from its speakers came the voices of astronauts Bill Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman. It was, at that time, the most watched television program in history.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
God bless all of you on the good earth. Part of me wants to just play that one more time, sing a carol, announce the blessing, and go home. What more needs to be said about how profound that moment was on Christmas Eve, 1968? The astronauts saw creation from God's vantage point. And because of photography, we got to see it. The images that they transmitted that night were black and white, out the window. You could barely see anything, but they took these pictures. They had Hasselblad cameras. They had handheld Hasselblad cameras, and they had Hasselblad cameras mounted. And if you go and you listen to some of the transmission, it's kind of funny. They were fumbling around with film, and hurry, hand me the color film. And they took that beautiful picture in a hurry, fumbling with camera and with film. And they captured creation. 10 years later, I love photography. It's probably because of some of these photographs. To this day, I'm a visual storyteller. I borrowed $2,000 from my parents and I bought a Hasselblad camera, the camera that went to the moon. Why Genesis on Christmas morning? Because Genesis is a kind of a Christmas story. Our gospel lesson this morning, the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John, is a kind of a Christmas story. Genesis opens with, in the beginning, God. John opens with, in the beginning, the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life is the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. As I wondered and I pondered and I prayed about what to say about the pre-existent Christ who took on flesh to be with us, I came across a teaching of a Franciscan friar and an educator in California by the name of Father Michael Guinan. The Franciscans have an expansive view of creation and incarnation. As I understand it, for them, creation and incarnation, well, they are the beginning of the salvation story itself. And I want to summarize briefly this morning, not in an attempt to adopt a new theology, but to hold up this jewel of the mystery of the incarnation and let the light catch it at a slightly different angle. John's prologue has its background in the wisdom tradition of the Hebrew Scriptures. And the background helps us answer two questions posed by John's prologue. How does God create? And two, what does God create? The first question, how does God create? The psalmist says, O Lord, how manifest are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. In the book of Job, God says to Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? In Proverbs, we read, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. Wisdom. But what is wisdom? Today, we understand wisdom by a development of the definition of that word that says wisdom is the ability to live in harmony with the world and other people. If we're wise, we know how to get along with people and the world. It leads to wisdom, and it leads to a good, happy life. But the Hebrew word for wisdom in the Bible means the ability to do a good job, to work on something well, to complete it with success, to do a good job. In that sense, the Old Testament describes God as a skilled craftsman. God does good work. Do you know a skilled craftsman? Maybe you are a skilled craftsman. You are wise. There's another book that's outside of our canon in the Protestant church, but in the Catholic church, it's in their canon. It's called Sirach. Sirach is one of the books of wisdom, and Sirach says, all the works of the Lord are very good. Sound familiar? In Genesis, after each of the 6 days of creation, God steps back and says, it's good. And after the 6th day, he steps back again, dusts himself off, rinses off his tools, and said, that's very good. Very good. The Apollo 8 astronauts, in essence, stepped back, looked at God's creation. And that's when Frank Borman said, Merry Christmas, God bless all of you on God's good earth. They captured something that we cannot capture in words. Good. An interesting word. When we study its occurrence in the Old Testament, we find that the Hebrew word behind it is better translated beautiful. Beautiful. Again, if you listen to the audio files of Apollo 8, they were amazed at what they saw. They were almost speechless at the beauty of God's creation. It spoke so powerfully to them. God is a skilled craftsman who, with wisdom, makes all things beautiful. Over time, wisdom came to be personified as Lady Wisdom. In Proverbs, Lady Wisdom says, "The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of long ago. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker, and I was his daily delight." In Sirach, Lady Wisdom says, "I came forth from the mouth of the Most High, and I covered the earth like a mist." The Wisdom of Solomon says, "I tell you what wisdom is and how she came to be, and I will hide no secrets from you, but I will trace her course from the beginning of creation." John's prologue has all of that as background. John then identifies Jesus with God's pre-existent wisdom. Then you might ask, why doesn't John write, "In the beginning was wisdom, and wisdom was with God, and wisdom was God"? This is only speculation, of course. We're talking about poetry and inspired imagination, but maybe it's because the word with the capital W in the Greek logos, which comes out of Greek philosophy, and John wanted to appeal to a more universal audience. We could study this endlessly. Or while Lady Wisdom is created, the Word is eternal. The Word of God is at the same time separate from God as it proceeds, but still carries the substance of God. We could study this endlessly. But we have the answer to our first question. How does God create? God creates with wisdom in and through the Word incarnate. Second question, what does God create? We know that God created this, the earth. The earth, by the way, is our stand-in for the entire universe. I couldn't fit the entire universe on the slide. But we know that what God created was that. Our astronauts, Anders, Lovell, and Borman, saw it with their own eyes, and they took pictures of it. The ancients didn't have this view, but they did have a cosmology. And the words they used to describe the earth form a picture. The world, as they understood it, has water above and water below, with the earth in the middle and a firmament to keep all that water in its place. It's a 3-story universe that stands on pillars. It looks a lot like a house. In Proverbs, we read, "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches." And later in Proverbs, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew." Proverbs uses the same language for building a house and building a universe. And in another place, we read in Proverbs, "Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars." It sure looks like God, the skilled craftsman, has built a house. All of creation is God's house. But in the Old Testament, God's house takes on a specialized meaning and is narrowly focused on the temple in Jerusalem, where heaven meets earth. Does Christianity have a temple? No. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. Jesus saw it coming. Remember what he said to the Samaritan woman? "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain," the Samaritans had their own temple, "nor in Jerusalem, but the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth." John's prologue says the Word became flesh and lived among us. Lived among us. Or the literal translation of lived among us from the Greek is pitched his tent, or tabernacled, or templed with us. The incarnate Jesus is the temple of God. All creation is the temple of God. And we might put it another way. Remember when Jesus cleansed the temple? They gave him a lot of criticism over that, and Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." They said, "This temple's been under construction for 46 years, and you're going to raise it up in 3 days?" And the evangelist says he was speaking of the temple of his body. Creation is the body of Christ, and it's all about the giftedness. Baby Jesus is a gift for which we praise the giver. Creation is a gift for which we praise the giver. In the words of Apollo astronaut Frank Borman, Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you.